Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. All of the expected stakeholders are not here, but in the interest of time, we will continue because we are recording the initiative and we will use this in ongoing efforts with the media as part of the campaigning going forward. That said, welcome everybody. My name is Leslie Jansen. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Resource Africa. Resource Africa is a non-governmental organization with an over 30-year track record of supporting rural African community efforts to secure their rights to access and use their natural resources in order to sustain their livelihoods. We believe rights are upheld and incentives for conservation are provided to those who live with wildlife. There will be positive conservation outcomes benefiting people and nature. We work in partnership with Southern Africa communities conserving, managing, and using wildlife called the Community Leaders Network, comprising over 40 leaders and their national associations from these countries. Together, we promote and aim to strengthen people-centered conservation for thriving, resilient livelihoods. We advocate collectively for people's rights to sustainably use their natural resources, especially their wildlife. We are here today at this media briefing promoting this advocacy campaign because there are millions of hectares of land across Southern and East Africa that are managed by rural communities where people and wildlife coexist for centuries. People have been custodians of nature, living and caring for wildlife. Today, their right to control, manage, and sustainably use their natural resources, including wildlife, for their benefit is enshrined in national law and international treaties. The United Kingdom is currently proposing legislation that is aimed at wildlife conservation. If passed with certain conditions, will greatly harm livelihoods of these African communities. The wildlife itself and the conservation program that ensure that animals survive and thrive. Similar legislation is followed now also by Italy and Belgium, and previously also the United States as well. This advocacy campaign is therefore introducing and seeks to protect the rights of African communities to ensure that any new laws do not threaten the welfare of people who conserve these animals. These often marginalized and poor communities need revenue to be able to sustain their community conservation efforts. It is a major source of income that has consistently funded the conservation of wildlife. It has helped to build schools, clinics, contribute to people's education, and that is the so-called trophy hunting. To start the discussion, Resource Africa has commissioned a series of short films, mainly for use by the media, our partners and stakeholders. It's a planned video series called Living in Harmony that will aim to tell powerful human stories from across Southern Africa. And these personal accounts will come from people in the front line of conservation, such as community leaders, small-scale farmers, villagers, activists, and politicians. And these stories, all broadcast ready, will be available for television, which can be adapted for radio, and it's also free of charge online. And so today we're showing a very short example of what you can expect in the Living in Harmony series. It is a story from the remote village of Bethsa in northern Botswana. Thank you.
If we do not pay attention to the existential challenges of coexistence with such species, then we probably stand readily accused of abrogating their human rights.
We just thought that it would be worthwhile to ask the farmers here how they are managing to produce so much when everybody else seems to have given up.
These ladies have to deal with not only elephant but quillia bird during the course of the day. It's a tiny little bird that eats cereals and grains, and they usually move in huge flocks. And if 1 or 2 or 3 of those flocks lands in here, that could also decimate this crop. As you can see, they are beating the plastic bottles and whistling and moving about in the field to keep the birds away. Just before they go to bed, they'll come and stoke them up again and pray that it works in keeping the elephants out. If it doesn't work and the elephants do come through, the entire family will wake up, try and make as much noise as they can by beating drums, clapping their hands, whistling, while some of the other members will go back to the perimeter fences to stoke up these fires in the dark.
But if the elephants insist on getting in and they're not really afraid of the noise that they're creating, then they have no choice but just to basically run. If the crop doesn't get raided by elephants, they can produce about 38 bags of millet, which is enough to feed this family for the entire year. Literally, those 38 bags are just enough to carry this family throughout the year. They don't even have enough surplus to sell to get other things. That's their entire livelihood. That's what they completely depend on.
They are citizens of my country, possessing equal human rights with everybody else. Not second to any. They are human beings.
Thank you very much for that video. We now go over to our first speaker, Dr. Rogers Lobilo, the chairman of the Southern Africa network called the Community Leaders Network, representing the interests of rural communities in 8 Southern Africa countries. Dr. Lobilo will be speaking on the concept of community-based natural resource management, in short called CBNRM, and the key issues affecting CBNRM and conservation in the context of the impending anti-hunting legislation. A bit of background about Dr. Lobilo, based in Zambia. He's the chairman of the Zambia CBNRM Forum, technical advisor at the Zambia Community Resources Board Association, director at CBNRM at Frankfurt Zoology Society, Zambia program. He has 25 years of active service in CBNRM, having worked in Zambia and other SADC countries, including Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, and South Africa, specializing in CBNRM and protected area governance, institutional management, organization and development, benefit sharing mechanisms, and building rural democracy and accountability. Dr. Lobilo holds a PhD in development sociology from Wageningen University, Netherlands, with a focus on wildlife conservation and CBNRM. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Rogers Lobilo. I'm the chairperson for the Zambia Community-Based Natural Resources Management Forum. Also, I'm a chairperson for Community Leaders Network of Southern Africa. CLN, in short, is an organization that has been set up to represent the interest of rural communities in Southern Africa. It is meant to amplify the community voices, to build a collective effort in promoting CBNRM in our countries. So CBNRM stands for Community-Based Natural Resources Management, which is a program that encourages the states or our governments to devolve some rights to the people who live with these natural resources, to be able to manage them, to protect them, and to generate benefits from them. Community conservation is a process where communities are involved in the day-to-day management, protection, organization of the natural resources. In different places of Southern Africa, there are structures that have been set up. For instance, in Namibia, there are communal conservancies that are organized. They have management committees, they have constitutions, they have game management plans. In Zambia, we have community resources boards. In Mozambique, we have natural resources trust. In Botswana, we have community conservation trust. All these community-based organizations that are involved in the management of natural resources are part of the structures, and we implement community conservation through these structures. Of course, each of the different governments in the region, they have put legislation and policies that encourage the participation of the local communities in natural resources management. This campaign is about CLN and its membership to communicate our opposition to the emerging legislation in the UK government and other countries in Europe and elsewhere in the world, which are aimed at limiting or banning the importation of trophies into their countries. What it basically means is that if they ban their citizens who come to hunt in Africa to transport the trophies from these animals, indirectly what they are doing is banning hunting. And that's what affects us, and that's what concerns us. So this campaign is about CLN to raise awareness, to talk, to engage to these various governments about the dangers of these bills or legislation that they hope to put in place, because we see these bills or these laws as being against our own rights, against our commitment to continue to protect our natural resources, especially wildlife. This campaign is actually founded on our opinion about rights. You see, our people, our communities, they are born in areas where there are these natural resources, and they've got the legitimate right, birthright, over its use, over its management, over its decisions. So we actually see that these laws, of course, they are attempting to undermine these rights. But I'm also excited and convinced that we support the position that has been taken by the African Union, especially in the human rights resolution that actually calls on member states to protect and put community interest and rights at the forefront of all conservation issues. So we believe that we should then encourage our colleagues, other governments out there in Europe to respect that position of African Union, because that position is actually fulfilling our desires as communities, because we need our rights to be protected. So our friends who are in a position of passing laws that undermine our rights, we are saying no to that. We are calling on them to engage us, to dialogue with us, to listen to us. Yeah, so trophy hunting, which is a part of conservation hunting, is practiced in many communities in Southern Africa. And I'll give a typical example. So what happens is either you are sitting in a conservancy, or you are sitting in a game management area or communal lands. The respective government departments responsible for wildlife will sit together with the communities to look at the wildlife numbers that are in a particular area. Many of these areas have been demarcated into hunting blocks. And so we are able to estimate the population of wildlife, the huntable species, and then quotas are set. Once these quotas are set, they are then given to the respective hunting outfitters who have been given the concessions with our communities and governments to hunt regulated species in those areas. And then once they market this, to different clients, especially many of these clients come from Europe, Russia, Belgium, United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, America, and other countries in Africa, especially South Africa. And I think they are doing it as part of the sport, as a leisure to them. But in return, usually, for instance, they will hunt a buffalo and they'll be interested in getting their horns. They'll leave the meat with the people. The people share the meat. They'll pay for the fee, and that money comes to the communities, which is also shared in different countries, is shared with communities. But then the clients who come to hunt, they need to transport their trophy back to their countries. And so that's how trophy hunting is organized. What we see is that when there are these laws in these different countries, the destination countries where this trophy needs to go with the clients, they are being prohibited. It means that those people can't come to Africa, can't come to hunt. It means they won't be able to pay. And then as communities will lose their much needed revenue. And what we also see, trophy hunting contributes to good sustainable conservation management, because we are able to manage wildlife populations through the process of regulated hunting. Some of the animals that are shot are those that could be causing problems, such as human animal conflicts. We see trophy hunting as a mechanism that actually helps us scientifically, social and political and economically to manage the resources adequately. Like I did mention that sustainable conservation hunting, which is trophy hunting, provides multiple benefits. To give specific clear examples of where I'll talk about my country, Zambia, where I come from. I come from one of the communities where trophy hunting has contributed to improving everything. So in my community where I come from, we employ our community scouts. Like right now, as I speak in Zambia, we have more than 1,200 community scouts whose salary is solely dependent on the revenues that come from trophy hunting. So when you look at a population of 1,200 scouts who get paid every month with an average household of about 6 people, we are already talking about more than 6,000 people that get direct benefit from revenues that come from hunting. We also use money from hunting to build schools, to build clinics, to put water points, to support orphans, to support funerals, to provide scholarships. In many places, we've built schools, teachers' houses, transport, and above all, trophy hunting also, promotes cultural exchange. It promotes tourism in these areas. It helps to build capacities. People have been trained, they've been taken to school, to colleges. There is awareness, there's capacity development. So without these revenues from trophy hunting, we wouldn't be able to do all these development, social developments, conservation developments that is taking place in these communities. We have communities where its major source of income is trophy hunting. In many places, we have about 80 community resources boards in the country, which is covering almost 30% of Zambia's landscape, which actually rely on revenues from trophy hunting. In Tanzania, where there are wildlife management areas, they do the same. You go to Mozambique, it's the same. So we see trophy hunting as a means to better the lives of the people. And without it, then poverty will escalate to levels that to threaten the existence of these natural resources. People will be forced to start poaching. People will be forced to start, massive agriculture, which will destroy the habitat for wildlife, which will undermine all the conservation efforts that we have endured over decades in our region. And that's why we will, at any time, resist any attempts by anybody outside our jurisdiction to undermine our rights and our efforts to protect and manage and benefit from these resources. In many countries, in many communities, including Zambia, Mozambique, Namibia, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, that form part of our network, we see huge impact in terms of conservation programming. One, there will be no resources to pay the scouts. And there will be no resources to pay the scouts, to buy uniforms, to buy rations. There will be no transport. What then it means is that there will be, we are likely to see an influx of illegal activities in these communities. Without robust trophy hunting, we might see a situation where community interest to look after these resources reduces, and thereby threatening or impacting negatively in the whole conservation program in Southern Africa. So trophy hunting is at the center, is the engine, is the nucleus of CBNRM. CBNRM has thrived, has improved, has evolved, has become resilient because trophy hunting has been part and parcel of its core agenda. And of course, We are open to criticism. We are open to comments. We are open to learning. We are open to research. But we believe that whatever decisions we make, we should just be improving how trophy hunting is done, as opposed to attempts to ban it. Because when you do that, then you cripple, you damage, you frustrate the CBNM program in general in Southern Africa. Our position as communities is shared with our governments. Our governments believe in sustainable trophy hunting, in sustainable conservation hunting. They believe in that. And our governments are very worried with the maneuvers of these greater nations to impose these rules, because actually it will create more burden for governments, which are already having economic challenges, to fill up all the needs. For me, and for many of the communities, we see this as a deliberate attempt to either impose some colonial tendencies, to impose decisions on us, because they believe we are vulnerable, we are weaker nations, and that we can, will be forced to bow to their dictates, which is quite unfortunate at this stage of the world. We believe that it's an economic aggression, to further perpetuate poverty in our communities. Yes, and because we have presented our facts, we have indicated, we have demonstrated our commitment to look after these iconic resources. We have demonstrated our abilities as communities and governments. Despite all our weak economies, we have demonstrated that we can look after these resources. But we can see that, these European countries, they are still determined at all costs to pass this legislation. So we see that as an attempt to undermine our sovereign rights, to undermine our countries, to undermine our leadership, because they believe that they're stronger than us. They believe that we should continue to bow to them. No, that is the thing of the past. Yes, we need cooperation, we need international relations, we need international dialogue, but I think they should listen to us. We are ready to improve the way we do our business. We are ready to improve on the distribution of benefits to our people. But you see, that does not mean that everything might not be perfect. Even democracy is not perfect, but we still continue to preach and support it. So even CBNRM might have some weaknesses, because trophy hunting might have some weaknesses. But in the end, we still see the bigger good of having trophy hunting as part of our conservation agenda. And I think our friends in the different countries in Europe must understand that. Just like they protect their citizens, just like they uphold the rights of their citizens, they should also respect us, because we also need to be respected because of those rights of our resources. We appreciate and understand how our colleagues in the West feel when they see an elephant or a lion or leopard being hunted down. Even us ourselves, we feel it. We understand, but you see, it is part and parcel of our heritage. It is part and parcel of our inheritance. Actually, we used to do this hunting traditionally. There was no commercialization. It used to be part of our life. But of course, the world has evolved over time. We appreciate, we understand their empathy or sympathy, what they feel about it. But they are living in fast places. They just see the elephants or the lions or the leopards from afar. They don't go through the relationship. Remember, here in Africa, where you find communities, you find wildlife. There's a relationship that we enjoy. We have agreed to share our life with them. And because they are part of and parcel of our lives, there is a system that we have to utilize them. Of course, in doing that business, because we're part of the global world, we are part of the global commons. Therefore, we expect, of course, our colleagues, the sport hunters who are out there in America, in Europe, in Asia, who are interested to promote our efforts. They come through, they buy, and of course, we are concerned if there are any elements of unethical hunting. We have never tolerated unethical hunting. No, we have not. We engage with our governments every time. We engage with our hunters that wherever there is a hunting, it must be ethical. We are not interested in molesting animals. No. Of course, we have seen situations where maybe a hunter is maybe portraying himself in a picture, with an animal. So no. We mean well. We are committed to look after these resources. We are committed to make sure that we participate in international comments. We participate in international dialogue. We participate in international engagements that will contribute to the sustainable management of our natural resources for the people, nature, and everybody else, including our communities and the world at large. We know if we keep the elephants safe in Southern Africa, the whole world is better. If we look after our resources well, the whole world is better. But we, the people who live with this, should be given the respect that we deserve, because we have demonstrated our ability to protect and manage these resources in the best way we can.
So, for that excellent presentation, I think it's some very important points that were made. Just so everyone knows, it was pre-recorded. Dr. Lubilo was not able to attend today. We nonetheless have a CLN representative also on the call if there's any questions to be dealt with. I certainly got a few key important points from Dr. Lubilo's presentation, saying hunting is the engine of CBNRM. Trophy hunting is the nucleus of CBNRM. Banning trophy hunting will create more burdens. It will further economic oppression. They understand the challenges. However, they see the bigger good of trophy hunting. They are open to critique. They are open to learn. They're open to improve. And they are committed to look after these resources. Very, very powerful words from the Community Leaders Network's leader. I, at this time, go over to our next speaker. She is Professor Amy Dickman, who is going to speak to the topic of scientific evidence around benefits of conservation hunting and sustainable livelihoods. We are very fortunate to have Professor Amy Dickman with us today. We're very fortunate to have her with us. She's a professor of wildlife conservation at Oxford University. She's the director of the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit and the joint CEO of Lion Landscapes. She's also a member of IUCN Cat Specialist Group, the IUCN Sustainable Use and Livelihood Specialist Group, as well as the IUCN Human Wildlife Conflict Specialist Group. Professor Dickman holds over 20 years of field conservation experience, has written over 100 scientific papers and book chapters on conservation, and is a National Geographic Explorer. Professor Dickman, you are welcome, and we give over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here today. It's a real privilege. I'm just going to check that. Can everyone see that screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. So as mentioned earlier, Dr. Lubilo gave a great overview of the community side of trophy hunting, this very contentious issue. But I'm going to talk in particular about the conservation and touch on the animal welfare side of it as well. And because this briefing today is targeted particularly at journalists, trophy hunting is a perfect media story. It has charismatic animals such as lions and rhinos and elephants at the heart, and they are obviously seen as the victims of it. It has villains, which are often seen as the evil trophy hunters coming in from abroad, and it has celebrities who amplify this and give it media coverage as well. And in short, it has a very simple, clear story, which lends itself very well to the media. So it talks about, rich, usually white, evil hunters coming to kill increasingly threatened species and driving them closer to extinction. So that is a really compelling narrative, and unsurprisingly, that tends to create lurid stories. It creates clickbait headlines, these very dramatic headlines and online links that people will click on. And really importantly to remember, it creates campaigns and donations. So a lot of organizations are raising money off this kind of very emotive campaigning, and that shouldn't be forgotten. But the reality of it is that it's a complex topic. And I think journalists in particular, this is all too often the case. There is a very simple answer to this, but it's often wrong. And the complicated answer is often the right one. And poor journalism on this topic and poor media coverage could really lead to real world harms. We've heard about the impacts that bans could lead in terms of undermining food security and economic security of these communities affected. And it could also lead to really intense harms for conservation and to animal welfare. And I'm going to be going through some of those today. So I thought it was important to look at some of the most common misconceptions and false statements that we hear in the media around this topic. One of the first issues is that people often confuse trophy hunting with canned hunting, with poaching, with illegal wildlife trade. So there's real confusion about what trophy hunting even is. There's also these statements that frequently drive the narrative that we see in the media. For example, that trophy hunting is driving species to extinction, that trophy hunting puts pressure on populations by removing the best genes and the best animals, that trophy hunting has no major conservation benefit, that any benefits of trophy hunting could be replaced by phototourism, and that trophy hunting bans will improve conservation and animal welfare outcomes. So to start, we should clarify what trophy hunting really is. And this is the legal, regulated hunting of wild animals with specific desired characteristics, such as large antlers, for example, or we heard there about the horns on the buffalo, which overlaps with widely practiced hunting for meat. So it's quite a complicated scenario. It's not a simplistic thing, because often somebody going out and killing, say, a white-tailed deer and eating the meat and then keeping the rack of the deer, then that also falls under trophy hunting. So it's not just happening in Africa, it happens all across the world. And it's not poaching or illegal wildlife trade. It's very important to note that it is legal and regulated. And although most of the media attention does focus on Africa, it does occur across the globe, including, for instance, in the UK. It's very notable that the UK, in the most recent iteration of the Animals Abroad Bill, is not suggesting that they ban trophy hunting in the UK, although I believe that the number of animals trophy hunted here is far higher than the number of animals that get imported. So this clearly isn't about the morality of trophy hunting. This must be something to do with them feeling it drives the decline of these species abroad. But actually, if you look at the majority of animals hunted, for instance, from the Humane Society US report, we're actually ducks and geese. So it isn't actually usually involving these charismatic megafauna. Also important to note that canned hunting is different from the wild trophy hunting that I'm discussing here. Canned hunting, again, poorly defined, but is the hunting of animals in often captive bred in small fenced enclosures. And groups like IUCN and others take, rightfully, I think, a stand against it. But I'm going to be talking about wild trophy hunting. So I'm going to look at these points one by one fairly briefly. So first of all, is trophy hunting driving species to extinction? Now, we are right in the middle of an analysis right now. Currently, we've examined over 80 species, including all the top trophy hunted species in that HSI report, the big five, the traditional African sort of hunted species, the most hunted African species, most endangered species on the red list. And so far, we haven't found one where trophy hunting is a key current threat at a species level. But we have found several where it's actually a benefit, such as with rhinos. And rather than trophy hunting, it's really clear that the threats primarily driving species decline are habitat loss, poaching, and human-wildlife conflict. This is one example of threats to lions from a recent paper. And you see that trophy hunting comes down here as nearly the last threat, far, far below things like human-lion conflict and the impacts of things like bushmeat poaching. So in short, it doesn't drive it doesn't drive extinction. We can see no evidence for that. But does it increase pressure, for instance, by removing the best genes or the best animals? And this is another common thread in the media narrative. So this study got a lot of attention, saying trophy hunting removes good genes and raises extinction risk. And it's true that trophy hunting can be a pressure for some populations, particularly in infanticidal species, where if you're taking younger males and you don't have enough young cubs, for example, to get up to independence, then you can have a cycle where you don't have enough recruitment, enough sort of surviving young cubs to maintain the populations well. So this can be a real pressure for things like lions and for leopards in some populations if the quotas are either too high or the males being taken are too young. So it's very important there to have age-based regulations. There is also limited evidence of some negative selection on species like bighorn sheep, where if there's very intense hunting, that can lead to things like smaller horn size over time. But it's really, really critical to notice that trophy hunting usually targets older males. And in those cases, the genes have already been passed on. So it's not true that those genes are disappearing from the population. If the age-based regulations are followed, then that should be the case, that it shouldn't remove those genes. The genes are already passed on. And this is really reflected in the study that gets all the media attention. They clearly say that the scientists themselves said age restrictions that allow males to breed before being removed could reduce the impact of trophy hunting. It's already recommended with species like lions. And the lead author said, when it's properly regulated, trophy hunting can be a powerful force for conservation, which is why in that study, they're suggesting a different management approach rather than calling for a ban. So very important that the nuance again is addressed, and that was in a BBC coverage of it. So moving on, does trophy hunting have any major conservation benefits? And this is an unequivocal yes. I think land conversion is the primary threat to biodiversity globally, and trophy hunting zones have the same key benefit as national parks in that they protect wild habitat. It's very hard to keep up to date with these maps. This is a slightly outdated map now, but this is looking at where lion trophy hunting was legal and not legal, and looking at the range of national parks. And it was clear that more lion range, this is true now, is covered by trophy hunting zones than by national parks. So it's a major conservation benefit, and decisions affecting that land use should be taken carefully and with the full participation of local decision makers, so not imposed externally. And just like phototourism, trophy hunting helps protect habitat and fund conservation. If you ask most people why are national parks important, they would say, well, they protect habitat. You know, the revenue from tourists coming in provides an incentive to keep the habitat. And that's exactly the same for hunting tourism. So they fund game guards, and therefore it incentivizes. You can see on the right here, this is a trophy hunting area. You can see that natural habitat right against it. This isn't even a fence, this is the natural boundary, goes straight into farmland where there isn't here an incentive to have a wildlife-based land use. And this is an example, again, slightly outdated maps here because there's been some change here with Nyeri National Park. But in general, this was looking at protected areas in Tanzania, a huge amount of protected areas across the country. And a lot of these light green areas are where the trophy hunting is permitted, whereas the dark green areas are the national parks. And if you look at the major threat of land conversions, this is agricultural land conversion in Tanzania, it's shown here by the red. You would know without knowing anything else, that if you look at all these spaces, there's something going on there that is protecting against land conversion, that huge threat for biodiversity. So really important to maintain those big wild areas. And also important to note, the hunting zones protect far more than just the hunted species. We looked at 18 species in Tanzania, including things like the endangered African wild dog, and actually the majority of its range occurred in hunting protected areas rather than in non-hunting protected areas or even outside protected areas. So really important to note this has a wider biodiversity impact. And it can be positive counterintuitively for many, even for species conservation that are hunted themselves. This has been seen, for instance, with the argali in Mongolia. Things like rhino, that's some of the best examples of this in places like South Africa and Namibia. So both black and white rhino have shown increases with limited regulated trophy hunting. And even for species like lions, you have places like Bubi Valley Conservancy, where the lion numbers have increased substantially in what used to be farmland, again, with using revenue from tightly controlled trophy hunting. Really important to note that it's not black and white. It all depends. The impact of trophy hunting will always depend on the context and the management, and the impact on species and communities will depend on that context. But in general, it's proven that it can absolutely have conservation benefits, including that massive protection of habitat. So could those benefits be replaced by phototourism? Unfortunately, the short answer is no. We did an analysis that looked at the current funding of just protected areas with lions in them across Africa, using all the existing funding streams, phototourism, trophy hunting, donor aid, and state funding, all combined, and found that more than 90% or around 90% of the protected areas were very underfunded. And so this is, all the red here shows the countries where over 90% of the need is underfunded. And this is with the current, all of those active revenue streams. If you take away trophy hunting as one of those revenue streams without replacing it with something better, you're going to make the situation worse, not better. So it's clear that phototourism cannot already fund even existing national parks well. And so it's not going to be able to fund more than double that area. It's just economically not going to be viable. And it's really important to note that it's not trophy hunting itself that is vital, but it is the conservation incentive to maintain land as natural habitat rather than converting it, for example, into farmland. And there is no clear viable alternative that currently exists at scale. There are interesting new ideas and innovatives like lion carbon, for instance, premium carbon credits that we help develop with biocarbon partners. This is looking at how to make lion habitat, in this case, more valuable and get additional revenue in. There are also things like wildlife bonds that could directly incentivize conservation. But these are all small scale ideas at the moment. They haven't been scaled up. They are not ready to replace trophy hunting at scale. And critically, as was touched on in the earlier presentation, they cannot be imposed from outside. If people choose to use these, then that should be their choice, often as an additive revenue stream rather than replacing existing ones. So really, would bans improve conservation and welfare? This is the dominant narrative. And we've certainly found from our study data down in southern Tanzania, we looked at both vacant hunting blocks where there was no management of the hunting blocks anymore. This is the kind of thing that will happen with increased bans if hunting becomes less economically viable, with active hunting blocks over here. And we found the probability of illegal human use was much higher in vacant hunting blocks. And this is unsurprising because, as Dr. Lubelo talked about, there isn't then the funding for things like anti-poaching patrols and the resourcing of that effort. So you have more illegal use. This is likely to lead to more poaching, to more habitat conversion, and will intensify those far greater threats, such as habitat loss. And it really comes down to the fact that if wildlife does not have economic value to people that exceeds its costs, then it will be removed. And we see this extensively. We see this extensively particularly with human-wildlife conflict. These are all images of wildlife on village land where they've been killed because they don't have sufficient revenue. And this huge threat is not covered nearly well enough by the media. And it affects, in our area, it affected between 50 to 100 times more animals than would have been legally allowed to be killed if it was a trophy hunting area. So this is the kind of killing that really, really drives wildlife decline. And particularly those killings are much worse for welfare. They're often poisonings, they're snarings, the animals take days to die sometimes, and they're much worse for conservation because it doesn't take away the older males. Or for almost all species, removing older males has less impact than removing younger males or adult females. Adult females is a huge driver of population decline. And for many of the animals that we encounter that have been killed, say in conflict killing, they are adult females and often heavily pregnant. This lion had 3 cubs ready to be born. And this is just devastating for a population. And if anything, there is a media story here, but I think the media story should be much more about warning that this is big government policy being driven largely by misinformation. So, for example, there is a recent committee that occurred in the House of Commons, and there was clear misinformation being given, talking about trophy hunting certainly being a driving factor of wildlife decline, and in some cases the dominant factor. Like, we cannot find the evidence that backs these things up. Another statement, today the total population of rhinos in Africa is 1,300. We know that's not true. And yet these are statements that go in there and inform policy. And these were stated by people who are actually driving a lot of these campaigns to ban trophy hunting. And again, to remember that those people are getting donations and getting funding off this policy. So it's not without another agenda. And ultimately, we need much more nuanced journalism showing the complexity of this topic. We see it to some extent when responsible journalists look into this, they tend to reflect the fact that it is much more nuanced. But unfortunately, this tends to be drowned out by the tabloid journalists and that simplistic narrative that gets the clickbait, gets the donations, and gets people feeling outraged. But unfortunately, what it leads to is bans that could have a far worse impact for both wildlife welfare and for conservation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amy, for that. I think it was very, very comprehensive and key. Are there any questions at this stage? It was very well done. None? Amy, if it's okay from my side, I wanted to also ask if you would want to comment on one of the publications recently was around, I think it was the article in the Daily Maverick in terms of putting a fund in place of trophy hunting, and if that is done well, quite globally, that could also be an alternative. What do you say to that?
Yes, I mean, I read that with interest, and I saw the response from the Community Leaders Network and others, and I thought my first response looking at it was that it only deals with a very small fraction of the issue, because yes, some of the funds from trophy hunting go in to help ameliorate, human-wildlife conflict and help, provide revenue for local communities. But there are two things to that. Firstly, that fund would not then, say you replaced trophy hunting just with that fund, it wouldn't then incentivize the maintenance of that huge amount of habitat. Why would government set aside that land for wildlife? There would be no reason to do it. I think ignoring the importance of the revenue streams that go to government is something that often happens in this debate and shouldn't be ignored, because that's a very, very important reason why the governments are actually conserving that land. It would do something, and it's important, at least somebody was talking about that need to replace funding and not just take away funding. So I thought that was a step in the right direction. But I really didn't like the fact that it became about external donations and external priorities over the local rights to be able to say, this is our resources, this is our wildlife, and we have the right to sustainably manage it. And that's something that should be respected. It's something that happens in the UK, it happens all over the world. And so why shouldn't it happen in Africa just because other people think that that wildlife is particularly charismatic? I don't think views on charismatic wildlife should supersede the needs and rights of people to manage their own wildlife. So I had a lot of concerns with it. It's good to open the narrative. And I think later the author did clarify that she wasn't saying that she just thought those rights should be ignored, but it did ignore particularly the issues of habitat conservation.
Okay, excellent. Going over to the comments in the chat, I see, Amy, you also suggested we post Roger's recording directly, but then we miss your excellent presentation.
Well, one option could be to post, is just, I think the sound was poor. So you could post, I don't know if it's possible to post a section of the recording where you could post mine if you want, and then you could post his as sort of a linked thing either way.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Marianne. There was a comment from your side. Would you like to speak to it? We've got 9 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. I wanted to ask Amy if I can forward her presentation to decision makers and journalists in Europe, because it's really clear that they have a completely misunderstanding the local problem in Africa. And it is really important that they have this point of view, because they are only provided arguments from animal rights people, and they have no counter arguments. So I think it's really vital that we provide this kind of information to key people in Europe, explaining the reality of Africa is much more complex than the arguments, simplistic arguments provided by some biased organizations. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. Amy, you want to?
Yeah, I'm very happy for this to be shared. Obviously, my intention is to share it and show that it is more complicated than is usually portrayed. I think rather than just sending them a PowerPoint in itself, because that won't make much sense to people, we can either send them the clip of the PowerPoint from here, if that can be edited down, or I could record the PowerPoint again
Yes.
with notes on it, and then we could send.
Yeah, excellent. If you can record, it would be even better. That would be fantastic, because you explain, yeah, with your words, it's perfect, because you, yes, would be very good. Thank you.
Let's see, first of all, whether we can cut from this, just because then it saves some time, but otherwise, if we can't, we'll do it another way. Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say we can edit this down, Marianne. That shouldn't be a problem. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
And then lastly, I see a question from Grant for CLN Sioka. If you would like to comment at this stage, and also specifically to the EU UK tour coming up. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yoga Simasipu. I'm the Executive Director of Ngamiland Council of NGO, located in Maum, Botswana. If some of you have traveled to Okavango Delta, basically they will know Maum. I'm a member of CLN as a representative from Botswana and a treasurer for CLN. We are actually going to go on a tour in Europe, basically for the effort of trying to amplify community voices. In Europe, we'll go to the Germany shore to basically also provide information about Southern Africa or Africa in a whole, in terms of the same issue of legislature that are passed by those countries to ban trophy hunting. We'll also go to the European Parliament and do the same. So that's what we are intending to do. But again, throughout the Southern Africa, we are also going to visit the SADC Secretariat to actually pass the same message, and also to make sure that communities are taking along in terms of the decisions that are taken by our governments, because we also want our governments to also participate, working with communities in terms of the decisions that they make. Because in most cases, communities only who are making statements, to actually stop certain governments from passing certain legislation. But often at times, governments are not taking any stand in terms of the decisions of the land. So this is some of the tools that we'll take to try and amplify community voices. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sioka, and you're welcome. There's a question that has been posted from EWN Crystal Orderson, posted by Sylvia. Thank you so much. And her question is, does RA have high-profile champions for the campaign, and who are they? I could probably respond to that to say, unfortunately, we don't have specific high-profile champions. What we do have is we've got communities organized in a network called the Community Leaders Network. We've got also a Thought Leaders Network, which is comprised of different specialists in the field of academics, research, and advocacy, speaking to the issues. There's a lot of engagement in terms of our social media, our Twitter accounts, and we had some very interesting comments from certain high individuals, which I think there's still room for us engaging them going forward, but unfortunately at this stage, not as high profile as we need, I think. Thanks. And then I got another comment, environmental specialist at the SABC morning live, stating environmental issues are hard to get onto the news agenda. What are the news events being planned in the next while? Grant, would you like to comment to that? And that's from Linky Bermin, environmental specialist at SABC morning live.
Thanks, Leslie. Could you just repeat it again? I broke up on my end, please.
Oh, she's stating that environmental issues are hard to get onto the news agenda, and what are the news events being planned in the next while?
Well, thanks for that question. One of the main events that are being planned is that, as Sioka might have mentioned, a number of a delegation from the Community Leaders Network, from CLN, will be traveling to the United Kingdom and to Europe to seek an audience with parliamentarians there. They already have an extraordinary hearing that is scheduled with the European Parliament, and that's quite an important moment and opportunity because, as you know, the European Parliament represents all political representation of all the countries that are part of the European Union. So we think that would be a very, very important opportunity and a newsworthy opportunity as we see more European countries joining this trend towards trying to undermine hunting tourism. So that would certainly be one big event. In the UK as well, we are trying to see if we could, CLN is trying to see if they can speak to parliamentarians. And I think it would be really interesting and newsworthy to hear for those constituents of those parliamentarians to hear what their response is to the evidence-based, scientific evidence that is being laid before them that they're choosing to ignore. So we'd be happy to share as that trip gets closer. We'll share those details and see how we can support.
Thanks, Grant. Would you also just like to sort of pull together how we will potentially use this recording of today going forward?
Absolutely. So we will package this recording in a number of ways. It will be presented in its entirety on our website, probably also the CLN website, our partner. It will be shared on social media in its entirety, but we will also package smaller user-friendly bits of it that focus on specific aspects that were dealt with in this briefing. We will make those available on social media, promote them. We could also find ways to share them directly with people who might be interested, but they'll be on all our socials and our website, and any opportunity we have to share with people, we will.
Okay, then thanks, Grant. Just another comment from Crystal Orderson, Senior Editor at EWN, a South African media house, stating, I'm working on the late shift, but I have put it on the news agenda, morning, afternoon, and evening. I will be in touch. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for that as well. So at this stage, we've reached the top of the hour. I would like to take the opportunity to thank Amy and Dr. Lobilo and also Sioka from the CLN for your input into this webinar. I think it's a great resource and that we will be intensifying these platforms going forward, especially as our campaign continues. And we will be in touch. And I think there will be a follow-up also to the different media people that we've reached out to. So it's an ongoing conversation. And today is a very important resource to be one of the first products to help kickstart the campaign. So on that note, I thank everyone for your attendance. Thank you. All of the best. Bye.